Hey folks, I'm sitting here in Spain with a Mavic 3 on the table. I just wish I could get back to the Pointy Mountain in Scotland, the place where this channel started, and fly this drone. One can but dream. Folks, you're still there. Sorry, I dozed off. How very rude of me. Right, since we've got the gear on the table, I suppose we should talk about it. This here is a Mavic 3. It comes with the RC-N1 controller that we've already seen with the Air 2S and the Mini 2. Here are the principal components of the Fly More combo: some ND filters, 2 extra batteries, a charging hub, and we also get this jazzy convertible bag that turns into a backpack. Pretty nice. So, I don't actually know the price of the Mavic 3 Fly More combo. It costs this much. Is it good? I think it might be expensive. You don't have to get the Fly More combo. If you don't get the Fly More combo, so you don't get some of these accessories, it costs this much. Right, there's also a second version of the Mavic 3, the Mavic 3 Cine. Pretty much everything is the same, except we get a different controller. But the main functionality that we get is the ability to shoot ProRes RAW 422, ridiculously high bitrate codec, which might be of interest to some of you that are working at a really high level. There's also a 1 terabyte internal storage in there, so those big ass files can be written fast enough into the internal memory. And that costs this much. Now we're going to focus on the normal standard Mavic 3 essentially, and some of the Fly More components today, because I think that's where most people's interest will be. By far the main talking point on this drone is the new dual camera system on there. The primary camera has a micro four thirds sensor. I didn't think they were going to be able to do that, and look at that, it's tiny, micro four thirds camera. Very exciting indeed, and it is good. We'll show you that in a second. Now the secondary camera, I want you to understand at the outset, these cameras don't share a sensor. The secondary camera has a 1/2 inch sensor, much more restricted functionality, shall we say. You need to stick around to see our comments on that later in the video, because I don't want there to be any confusion. First things first, however, it has been over 3 years since the Mavic 2 Pro came out, so we do have some hardware developments to talk about. Let's get into that now. I must admit, I don't really care what a drone looks like, but this Mavic 3 is quite attractive. I find it quite stylish, a nice dark grey. The arms are much sleeker than before. Now, more important than appearance, DJI says that the Mavic 3 has reduced the wind resistance by 35% compared with its predecessor. Combined with an enormous 5,000 milliamp battery, we get a stated flight time of 46 minutes. Obviously, you've got to take those numbers with a pinch of salt, but it does feel like an absolute lifetime when you're flying the drone. Both the Mavic 3 Standard and the Mavic 3 Cine are sub 900 gram drones. I'm not going to get into EU drone regulation here, but being on the right side of 900 grams is certainly helpful. We have an upgraded transmission system between the controller and the drone, O3 Plus, giving us a stated range of 15 kilometers. Now obviously that's completely illegal. You'll never see that drone 15 kilometers away. I'm not interested in that, but what I am interested in is an indestructible signal between the controller and the drone, and without doubt we have that. The Mavic 3 uses the DJI Fly app. It's much more streamlined than the original DJI Go 4 app, so a very welcome development in that respect. With a top speed of 47 miles per hour, this is DJI's fastest and most wind-resistant drone. It really is solid when it's in the air. We have incremental increases in terms of ascent speed and descent speed also. What I can tell you anecdotally, though, having flown the drone, is that it handles very similarly to the Mavic 2 Pro. So I wouldn't expect any night and day difference there in terms of speed, power, wind stability, all that kind of stuff. Both of them solid as a rock when it comes to flight characteristics. We have full omnidirectional obstacle avoidance now, so forwards facing sensors, backwards, up, down and sideways. Extremely beneficial. Obstacle avoidance has saved my bacon many times, and there's a couple of knock-on implications there. We have an upgrade to APAS 5.0, that's your Advanced Pilot Assistance System, autonomous flight essentially. That takes advantage of the omnidirectional obstacle avoidance, as does Active Track 5.0. Now, I wasn't able to test that, but it's supposed to have some added benefits thanks to the omnidirectional obstacle avoidance. We'll need to test that at some point in the future. And in terms of your advanced return to home, the forwards-facing sensors now have a detection range of 200 meters. Only when using advanced return to home, that is. So it allows the drone to plot a safer and better route back to your landing spot. Let's get on to the bit that's really going to make people decide whether or not to buy this drone, and that is the camera. We'll talk about the primary camera first, and then we'll talk about the secondary zoom camera. Please stick around for the comments about the secondary zoom camera. It might not be quite what you're expecting. Right. The primary camera, micro 4/3 inch sensor, tremendous achievement to get that big low light sensor in that camera. I mean, there's two cameras in there. I'm really genuinely impressed with this. I didn't think it was going to happen. 24mm field of view with a variable aperture of f2.8 to f11. Variable aperture is very useful when you're using your ND filters. Allows you to tweak your exposure when you've got the drone up in the sky. 10-bit D-Log-M giving us a stated 12.8 stops of dynamic range. The camera shoots 20 megapixel photographs, and in video mode our resolution goes all the way up to 5.12K at 50 frames per second. 4K frame rates go all the way up to 120 frames per second. Much like the Mavic 2 Pro, the primary camera was co-developed with Hasselblad, giving us Hasselblad natural color solutions. Now, if ever there was marketing speak, that was it. So how does it perform? Does it live up to expectations? Is it any good? And is it worth the money? Based on our tests, the principal micro four thirds camera in there does live up to expectations. We compared it with the industry standard micro four thirds camera that's filming me right now, Panasonic Lumix GH5, and in many ways this camera was better than that dedicated camera that is filming me right now. Checking the detail and sharpness of the Mavic 3 footage, you can see the benefit of that extra resolution in the palm trees. The image is sharp, but it doesn't have that digitally sharpened look that we sometimes see with DJI drones. Where I've been even more impressed, however, is on the subject of shadow recovery. It's something we do all the time with our aerial work. Now, I've got a slightly extreme example here where we've boosted the shadows in post, but you can see the nice smooth way that the Mavic 3 deals with that shadow recovery, compared with the more typical result you see on the GH5, where the noise in the shadows is dancing around like static on the screen. Bigger sensor cameras should perform better in low light scenarios. Now here it's pretty dark. It doesn't look it because we've boosted the ISO to 1600, but you can see the lights are on in the vehicles. There's a bit of grain in the image, but it's certainly a very respectable picture. Incremental dynamic range benefits only really play a role in high contrast scenes, so sunrises or sunsets, or very often in drone work we've got a sun behind some white clouds and it blows out the sky and it looks a little bit ugly. You'll see benefits here having a better quality camera for sure. This is where knowing how to use your gear comes into play. Definitely check out our 8-hour drone cinematography masterclass. World famous and world renowned. It really is. Very good, if I may say so myself. Link in the description below, and we'll teach you everything you need to know to learn how to actually use your drone, be it a Mini 2 or a Mavic 3. Speaking of knowing how to use your drone, one beef that I have with DJI on these higher end drones is they don't give us a D-Cine-like picture profile. They give us a normal picture profile, which you should not be using if you're buying a Mavic 3, or they give us a D-Log picture profile with all the benefits that comes from that. But it's a tremendously involved process color grading that footage. You need a fair bit of experience to do it, and it's time consuming. Even if you have the experience, you might not want to bother. I really wish they would give us a D-Cine-like picture profile on these higher end drones. I'm very pleased there's no barrel distortion like we got with the Mavic 2 Pro. Now I know that was a clean read from the sensor and all that kind of stuff, but it was an extra step that we had to do in post. Here all our lines are straight, lovely rectilinear lens. A little observation that's not that important but worth knowing anyway is that if you're shooting on 5.12K, And the pixels are 5120 across the top, 2700 down the side. Now that's not a 16:9 aspect ratio, so if you are going for 16:9, you'll actually need to crop in a little bit to get rid of the black bars at the top and bottom of the screen. Now at present we don't have the 2x digital zoom option on the primary camera there. I'm told that it is coming with a future firmware update. I think it will be appreciated because we have this nice 5.1K resolution. We can 2x zoom in that and still get a super sharp high quality image and get some parallax effects using the principal camera. Now speaking of principal cameras and zooms, let's talk about the zoom lens. The zoom lens on the Mavic 3 is a completely different camera that doesn't share any of the characteristics of the main lens that sits underneath. So we get a 24mm field of view capable of taking 20 megapixel photos, but it's a 1/2 inch sensor. Now I'm hoping some of these things that I'm about to say will change with future firmware updates because the zoom lens has so much potential, but at the moment it feels a little bit unfinished, if I'm honest. The aperture is f4.4, which I suppose is probably fixed and can't be changed. But in terms of shooting modes, we're restricted to 30 frames per second at 4K, so no option of 25, no option of 24. This to me seems a little bit strange and quite limiting. I'm told by DJI might change going forwards. There's no manual exposure controls. I mean, why would you want manual exposure controls? I mean, if the one thing that we learned from the original Mavic Mini was that people want manual exposure controls. Yeah, I don't know why they've done that. In terms of photographs, it only takes JPEGs. And now if we talk about the zoom functionality itself, it's a little bit strange. We have 1x zoom, so that's your 24mm field of view. That's fine, but you're never going to use that because we have the far superior Micro Four Thirds camera sitting underneath. So we can then tap the zoom icon and it gives us 2 and 4x zoom options. They're digital zooms, so an artificial digital crop essentially that takes place in camera of that so-so picture quality that we're getting from the full wide angle. You can tell the deterioration in the picture quality the second we punch into 2 and 4x digital zooms. I wouldn't recommend you use them, but we get a 7x optical zoom and it's dead nice. Sharp picture quality and this cool perspective zoomed in 7x. It's quite a novelty for a drone user to get that focal length. From that 7x we can then punch into 14x and 28x digital zoom on that 7x optical zoom essentially, and obviously the quality then deteriorates again. The only thing I would say is that because we have this novel field of view being cropped in so much, I'd be prepared to overlook that loss of picture quality for the fun and interesting creative opportunities that come with that additional field of view. Anyway, in a nutshell, the only real true zoom capability on this zoom lens is the 7x optical zoom. The zoom camera is really more of a mode than a separate camera system. DJI even calls it explore mode. You can't, at the moment at least, use active track in explore mode. It's not really a fully functioning zoom camera, which I think is a shame. I ran it by DJI and they said at the moment the 7x optical zoom is really the only way of using it properly for content creation. The rest of it's maybe just for location scouting, so you can then see from a distance where you might want to fly to. It has so much potential. I love zoom lenses on drones. We did videos about creating parallax effects that you can get with that. So I think there's a lot more to get out of this zoom lens. But at the moment, I just want you to understand where its functionality lies. I don't want there to be any confusion there. I hope that that zoom lens doesn't kind of detract from the overall offering. It doesn't feel like an afterthought, but it feels like it was originally intended to be something far better, to be honest with you, and for whatever reason they haven't quite managed to do that, so it's been kind of migrated into more of an explore mode than a full secondary camera system. But anyway, we'll see what the future holds there. I think it's very exciting. I think if you're in the market for the best quality picture for your aerial work, then unquestionably the Mavic 3 is the one for you. But we've got a lot of good options. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts. Mini 2, Air 2S, Mavic 3. Yeah, not a bad position to be in if you're in the market for a new drone. Do leave your comments below. As I said, check out that masterclass that we have. It's what you do with the drone that counts after all, and we will see you next time.